it's easier just to go through the situation and apologize to your kid and then just move on. But,
and not actually figure out why did I respond that way.
Right.
You're listening to the Connected Parenting Minute with Will and CarrieAnn Standfest. This podcast is a conversation about parenting, using connection first, trauma-informed principles. Because when you lead with connection, everyone feels seen, which is the foundation to a more peaceful home. This podcast reminds you that you don't have to be a perfect parent, but we can all get a little better, one connected parenting minute at a time.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Will Standfest, and I am so glad that you've chosen to join us this wonderful evening. With me, as always, is my lovely wife, CarrieAnn.
Hey, everybody.
How are you doing tonight, hon?
I am doing really, really, really good tonight. Do you want to know why?
I do want to know why.
Because we have a special guest on our podcast tonight.
We do have a very special guest tonight. Tonight is our question and answer episode where we're kind of celebrating completing season 2 of the podcast. And we decided to reach out over the last few weeks and have some listener questions. And our good friend Kayla North happened to be in town this week when we're recording.
Yeah, it's so exciting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about our friend Kayla North?
Well, Ryan and Kayla North are friends of ours for almost 4 years now.
Woohoo.
They have been in the adoption and foster care world speaking about trauma-informed care and about caring for siblings and leading ministries. And I'm not doing nearly as good a job at this as I thought I would. We've learned a lot of what we've learned about connected parenting and about trauma-informed parenting has come from them over the last several years as we've gone into our journey through adoption and foster care and all that. And so we've appreciated and we've learned a lot from them.
And now they're our friends.
And we come stay at each other's houses now.
That's right. Come on, can you tell us where you're from, Kayla?
So I am from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So we live about 10 minutes from the DFW airport, which is really great for when we're traveling because we don't have to go very far.
That's true. When people come to your house.
I know. I can come pick them up. It's really nice. Like when we came out here and we had to be on the flight that left at like it's 7:30 in the morning. I was like, that's a little early, but at least I can kind of roll out of bed
and just get there.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And there's a special reason why you guys came. You want to share that with us?
Yeah. So I got to bring my 15-year-old daughter. So when our girls met at camp, I think they were like instant friends. Like, you know, they just connected right away and they're both in theater. So of course my daughter's like, I got to come see Annabelle and her like play. So, you know, it was like, okay, well, let's make it happen. So we did.
Yeah. And it was a surprise for our 15-year-old daughter. And she was so excited when we finally kind of like picked you up at the airport. There's a whole story
she thought
with
she
that.
was going to IKEA and was a little confused why you turned into the airport.
Yep. It was a surprise because her friend wanted to keep it a secret. Yes. And so we were like, let's do it. And she was really hoping that you guys would come. But she's like, I get it. You know, she's super like, okay, it's not going to work. But she was a little suspicious.
I told Brooklyn, I was like, you got to tell her that, like, you know, I don't think we can afford it right now. And just play it up. Like, I'm so mad. My parents can't make it work or whatever. And she was like, I'm not going to lie to her, Mom. And I was like, okay, fine. That's for a surprise. I mean, you can kind of, you know, fib a little.
It was funny because at one point she was trying to corner Brooklyn on it. She's like, yeah, we can't, because Brooklyn was trying to, from me reading the text, I could tell she was trying to avoid answering the question directly. And I was like, no, tell me 100%. Are you coming or not? And then she's like,
oh, I hear my mom calling.
Yeah, it's like something like that. Just totally. And it was like, I don't know. Like,
she just avoided it.
No, but I don't think she's coming.
Right.
It was fun. It was fun. It was really special. My daughter really enjoyed them coming for a couple days and doing that. But
oh yeah, I'm glad we have the flexibility since we, you know, homeschool and we can just kind of, sure, let's go. Let's do it. So it's kind of fun.
No, it's been great. There's just this element of being able to do something special for your kid and, you know, on both ends. Right.
Oh, for sure,
I mean, like,
for sure.
It's nice to be able to say yes to your kids.
Yeah.
So.
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Will, we've been talking about our special question and answer episode. So we should start off with our first question.
Yes. Anybody who's listened to the podcast the last few weeks, we've been asking for some listener questions to kind of celebrate the end of the season. And we wanted to directly dive into the questions that are on your mind. And so we've got a handful of questions we're going to walk through tonight. The first one, I think, is one I think all three of us have heard many times. The question is, I've heard you talking about how behaviors can be expressing needs, but how can we tell the difference between when my child is expressing a need and when they're just being naughty?
Just being naughty.
Yep. So you want to spend the whole episode on just that answer, right?
Right.
Because that's what it's going to take, right? Oh, gosh. Yeah, I think I've heard that question more than anything, because really what's being asked is, when can I punish my kid and when do I have to like do this kind of connected parenting stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, because that's the question I feel like most people are asking is like, okay, I get it that sometimes it's a need, but when they melt down because I didn't give them candy, that's not really a need, that's a want, and they're just being a brat, you know?
Yeah.
It feels like that. I mean, goodness sakes.
It does.
Right?
Absolutely. Especially when it's in a really public place like the grocery store. And you're like, everybody's eyes are on me and they're wondering what I'm going to do with my melting down kid, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we've definitely faced that situation more than once. And it's hard because when you think about it, there is, I mean, like when you really step back and you're not the emotional parent in the moment, you recognize it can be both. Because I mean, like when we want something, we want it and we're not going to pay attention to other things. Like adults do this too, right? They want something and it's not reasonable or whatever, but I just want it. And there's not a really good reason behind it. But maybe you're not thinking clearly because you're tired or because you're hungry or because something else is going on. And so there is like a need under there, but our kids are the same way, right?
Well, and sometimes it's not that they needed the candy at the store. It's that they need more skills to deal with the disappointment of not getting the candy.
Yes.
Ooh, there it is.
And so it's like, yeah, it's a need, but it's not a need for the thing. It's a need for the skill. And so we get the opportunity to teach a skill in the moment, right? So, you're so disappointed that you couldn't have that candy. I know it's really hard. And I wish I could always say yes to candy, but today's not a day we're getting candy, you know, and like just being able to like identify the emotion that they're dealing with and help them figure out ways to deal with their big feelings. Because we all have big feelings.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, but we can't always throw a fit every time we have a big feeling. But as adults with adult brains, we know that and we're able to regulate ourselves most of the time.
Yeah.
But we've all seen adults have fits in the store because they didn't get what they wanted, right? I mean, I think we even have a phrase, a name we call people that ask for the manager, right? Like they're throwing a little mini fit in the store because they didn't get what they wanted.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't a need. They just didn't know how to express their big emotions because they didn't have the skills for that moment. Or they, like you said, they were hungry, they were tired. That was just the final straw for the day of like, I've had so many disappointments that I couldn't handle one more disappointment. It put me out of that window of tolerance.
Right. Well, and then I actually think of a situation that happened tonight that illustrates this, because as parents, we can be in the position, if we are thinking clearly, if we're self-regulated, of anticipating some of the things that our children might experience and kind of heading them off at the pass.
Yep.
So the example for tonight is our youngest was very excited about playing with your daughter.
Yes.
And she had mentioned earlier that they wanted to draw together. And it's getting later. We did a little extra. We went to the park, you know, and so it's getting close to...
We did lots of fun.
Right. We did lots of fun things, but she was stuck and she was like, I want to do this drawing thing with her because I know she's leaving and then, you know, I'm not going to get another chance. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I tell her she can't, she's going to lose her stuff. And I know that it's really important to her. And I was like, how can I like diffuse the situation a little bit? And I kind of came in there and I was like, babe, I know you really want to do this, but you really need to go to bed. So what if we say tomorrow you can come with us when we drive to the airport? And she was like, yep, I want that. Okay, good night, mommy. You know, but there was like, I knew I could anticipate that there was going to be, that was going to be hard for her. And so it's like, how can we work the situation so that way we both win kind of in the end?
Right. Well, because the reality was she just wanted more time with Brooklyn before she left. So she's still getting more time before she leaves.
Right.
It's just, in the morning and not tonight.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and the other part about that piece is, like you're saying, anticipating the situation. You're being the detective. Like you're reading the situation. You can see it coming. And you're like, what can I do before this gets high? How can I catch it low?
Yeah.
How can I catch it low and anticipate a way kind of around or a compromise we can make that would help this situation go well?
Yeah.
When you can see it heading south.
I think back to the original question is like, how do you tell the difference? I don't think you have to tell the difference. I think is really the reality behind that. Because if we're really just trying to figure out when do we get to punish them and when do we use connected parenting, we should always use connected parenting. Like the relationship is the goal.
Exactly.
And so if relationship is the goal, then it's not about figuring out when do I punish and when do I not. It's about what's the need in the situation. And there's always a need. There's always behavior always has function in the, context. It's like, just what is it functioning as? Is it telling me I need to work on a skill? Is it telling me that, maybe I'm hungry or I'm tired or some other physical need that hasn't been met or whatever? And I think, the real answer is it's always about relationship and it's never an either or. It's just, there's always a need of some sort.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's a really point.
Well said. Question number 2. I've been listening to some episodes of your podcast. We have adopted 3 boys in the last 4 years. Our oldest is 13, and we've been having some issues lately. We are really struggling with lies with our son. Do you have any tips on changing that behavior? He gives a little background saying that we know it's a result of trauma that he faced in the first several years of his life, but we're really struggling to have a good relationship with him because he will lie about anything and everything. At times he gets a little physical, but we honestly think it's because he doesn't know how big he is, not that he wants to hurt anybody.
I feel like we could write this question sometimes. We've
definitely had kiddos that have had, they're too big for their bodies and don't quite know how big they are and what they're doing and all the experience with lying and things like that. But I think I guess the first piece I want to acknowledge there is it is hard.
Yeah. When
you've got a kiddo, especially he's 13 years old and you don't have a 13 years of bonding with it. If they've adopted 3 in the last 4 years, that's a lot.
Yeah.
At most, this kid has been in this home for 4 years. Awesome. That's a short amount of time out of a 13-year life.
Yeah.
And it does make it hard. Like it does when you have a lying situation going on, it is difficult. And so I want to acknowledge that feeling like you can trust him and feeling like you can build a relationship, like those feelings are hard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I don't know anybody that I've ever met that's not triggered by lying because it feels so personal.
It does.
It feels like a personal attack, or it feels like it's like, why don't you trust me?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's also like, why do you think I'm that stupid? Because it's really bad lying half the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like you just feel like you're insulted personally that they thought you were dumb enough to believe whatever they just said, right? Because it's usually just really dumb stuff. And so we always take it personally first, and then we respond out of that personal feeling of frustration or whatever it is. But lying always, I don't want to say always, but I think I've found that lying almost always has purpose.
Yes.
Like there's some purpose behind it. It's just not always easy to find. And especially not if you're emotionally connected to the situation. Because if you're emotionally connected, again, you've got that feeling of, why did they think I was that stupid? Or why can't they trust me? Or I always give you the benefit of the doubt, or I've never responded. Like we had this conversation with one of our kids the other day where I was just like, I just felt like it was like, why do you not trust me after all these years? Because, I don't remember if we said this, but like we have 6 kids, and we adopted 4 of our kids, and all of them have been home at least 10 years, right? So it's not like they're, we started fostering 20 years ago. So it's not like any of them have just come home in the last couple of years. And so sometimes it feels like, and that's, we're at least 10 years in with all of our kids. So it's only been 4 years, there's still that frustration because it's like, why don't you trust me? Like you can tell me I don't respond terribly. I'm always kind. I always respond. Well, not always, but you know what I mean.
Right.
But you've got some history built up there where it feels like, it almost feels like the longer our kiddos are in home, it almost like the lying almost hits a little bit differently, a little different. Like it hits a little harder because I can remember early on when various kiddos were staying with us either through foster care or even the kiddos we've ended up adopting, that I do remember the lying feeling different. Like I was a little more prepared that this is just a survival skill, and your brain tells you this is just a phase. It'll go away in a little while. Quotes.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's just our wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think our kids get really, it almost becomes a default for them. I have, one of our kiddos who, when this kiddo was younger, we would be like, it's almost like lie vomiting is kind of like how we thought of it. Mm-hmm. It sounds really gross, but it's like, it was the first thing that would come out of their mouth. Like, was like this made up story. Mm-hmm. And you could tell there was like a split second where it was like, wasn't true. And it was like, if you could just think it through in that split second. So we'd be like, hey, I know sometimes things come out of your mouth and then you realize that wasn't true. Just say, let me try that again. Let's just do it over again, And we'd be like, and sometimes when we could tell, we'd be like, is that how you wanted to say that? Did you want to try again? And sometimes just that little prompting would be like, actually what I meant was, and we're like, oh, okay. I thought maybe that didn't come out quite right. We didn't make a big deal about it. Right. We just allowed it to happen kind of naturally. And I wouldn't say it always worked, but a lot of times it would work. Sometimes it would be like, no, that's exactly what I meant. And as a matter of fact, and let's add on an extra one.
Why don't you trust me?
Yes. Why don't you ever trust me? And you're like, oh, come on. But it's hard. Lying's triggering for all of us.
It is. It really is.
I think that's a really great point, is that the lying nobody likes to be lied to.
No.
I mean, and especially when it's a kid that we have experienced that with before, because we've had these conversations with some of our kids. Okay, I know it feels like the first thing you want to do is tell us what you think we want to hear.
Yep.
And I get that. Like, I know that's the first thing you go to, but it's hard because it's like, we've explained it's like a bank and it builds up, when you're depositing truth in there, it's easier to trust you, and I want to trust you. And we've come down to the point where it's like the kids telling us, well, I think trust is a choice. I'm like, yes, it absolutely is a choice, but so is telling the thing that you're afraid that we're going to get upset about. And so we finally kind of turned it, and we still get it, but I'm going to see where this goes, because I'm like, yes, but it's also choice. If you feel like we're going to be upset with something, I know it's hard. I know it's so hard. And then when we find him telling us something true, we just like, oh, bud, I know that. Thank you so much for telling me that. I know you were worried about what the result would be, but there's no magic bullet.
Right.
There's not.
And because ultimately it's about trust on both sides, right? Like I don't trust you because you don't tell me the truth. And you don't trust me enough to tell me the truth, Right. And it's like this, both sides, it really is all about trust. Mm-hmm. And I would say the biggest thing that we have found, because we have struggled, one of ours in particular, but we've got several that have struggled with it over, different periods of time, but one in particular. And I think the biggest thing is continuing to be consistent with our responses and not overreacting when something bad happens. And just being like, oh, thank you for telling me that. I appreciate, because they could have lied about it, right? It's like there's a situation they could have lied about, but they told us what was going on. And you would say, man, I really appreciate you. Tell me what's going on. I know that wasn't easy.
Yeah, that's huge.
Then, crying into my pillow later when I did, it was like, it was really hard. And, because if we overreact, then they really won't trust us to be able to handle it. Mm-hmm. But also, making sure that we're always just available and building that relationship, because that is the thing that my kiddo that really struggles with it. When our relationship is strong and things are good, the lies are way less. Mm-hmm. And when I feel like there's a rift between us and we're at odds about everything, and I feel like I'm always like trying to like second guess everything they're doing and all that stuff, the lies just increase, because I feel like for my kid in particular, it's a stress response.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so the more I can lower the stress level and help this kid feel connected to the rest of the family, the less the lies are. I mean, there are times where I'm like, I'm sure there's probably a little one here or there that I don't even catch. But for the most part, the big lies or the stuff that I was really worried about is not happening, because this kid feels connected and safe and doesn't feel the need to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another important piece of that is realizing that it might not be perfect right now. And it may never get to the point where you quote unquote or have that perfect relationship, but that we're building slowly over time. And the idea is that we are modeling not good behavior, but trustworthy behavior in our kids. And so hopefully as they mature, they'll start to see that, and they might take a dip and it might be really difficult, but hopefully with building that relationship that they learn that they can trust us over time.
Yeah, for sure.
I love it.
Yeah.
Good thoughts. All right. And then the last question, CarrieAnn, I believe you had.
Yeah. So the last question is really like, what is probably a good tip for how you can overall be a more connected parent?
Yeah. So I all the time I'm trying to figure out like, what is it that I've done that has made the biggest difference, in my parenting? Because before we were parents, we read all the books we could think of, some of the ones that I would definitely not recommend.
Right.
And then, we found new books and we found podcasts and we found talk to people and all this stuff. But the thing that's made the most difference for me personally is just looking at my own history and being able to find out, why do I respond the way I do to my kids? Because I can't control my kids' behavior. Like, there is nothing like parenting an adult child to make you realize you have no control over your children. Right?
Oh,
you guys know that,
right?
I mean, I have two of my kids are adult children, I say in quotation marks, right? Because their brain's still developing. They still need lots of guidance. They still need lots of feedback. But you have to do it in such a different way once they become adults, and you go, oh, they're not a toddler that I can just pick up and put in their crib and like keep them safe, right? I have to do it so much differently. And so I have found that all I can control is my own responses. And so I have to do everything to control those responses. And so looking at, like, a lot of times people will be like, process your own trauma. Like, I don't have big trauma in my past. I wasn't abused. I lived in a, 2-parent home where my parents loved each other, but I have things in my past that I've experienced, as we were talking about the lies. It's like, oh, I had a good friend that lied to me. So lying became a huge trigger for me. And so therefore, when my kids lied to me, I didn't just have the regular amount of like, don't lie to me. I had the like, this is not acceptable. And I'm going to make sure in this very moment how not acceptable it is, right? Like, my responses were like over the top.
Yeah.
And I had to go, what is it in me that makes that such a big response? Like, why does that hurt me so much? And I had to process that. I had to go through like, oh, because when my friend lied to me when I was in high school, I felt betrayed. And now my child is betraying me all over again. I had processed that, So when I can step back and go, okay, I'm responding to my friend from high school that I never really dealt with, not my kid who's experienced trauma, right? Like, that's not who I'm responding to. So for me, that's been like night and day difference in just my responses because I'm aware of them.
Yeah, I think there's so much there. We talk a lot about want to help our children to do better and learn things, but when we're not in a regular place, especially in the moment, it's almost impossible because you do have those big reactions. Yeah. You're reacting to those things in your past or like your experiences that aren't warranted. They're not equal to what's actually happening in front of us. And taking a look at that and being able to figure out where that comes from in ourselves is so important to be able to process through that, to be able to actually parent the kid that's in front of us. Well, it's tough because, we live in a society now, I think that like therapy is more commonly accepted. It's not this terrible, don't tell anybody I go to therapy type of thing.
Right.
But
now it's like, hey, who's your therapist? Right. Maybe I should go see him too.
Right. But, not every therapist has the same like standards. And, there's just so many different aspects of that when we talk about understanding your past and how, it's a lot of work, right? And that's the problem. It's easier just to go through the situation and apologize to your kid and then just move on.
And not actually figure out why did I respond that way? Or,
right.
Because we all make the mistake where we say something or we snap at our kid because we were hungry or whatever, right? Like we all have those moments, but there's sometimes like, I like to explain it. Like, this sounds terrible, like weird, but it's like an out of body experience that I'm having, where like I can see myself starting to get really angry and I can see myself starting to have reactions and responses. And I feel like I can't do anything to stop it.
Yes.
Like it just happens. And then I feel really shameful afterwards. Like I'm like, oh, that's not how I want to respond to my kids. And it's those moments that I go, okay, something is like, there's something inside that I'm responding to. Like, this is not a normal, like, I'm frustrated by the day, or I didn't get a good snack today. And so I'm, snapped at my kids. This is something deeper. This is something that it has hit inside me. There's a wounding in me, or there's a spot in me that needs to be dealt with. And those moments are when I feel like, okay, if I can work on that, then I'll be able to respond better in that moment. And it won't be so personal to me,
Yeah.
Because it's the personal reactions that are the ones that cause the overreaction. Because again, I was talking to one of my kids' therapists one time and I was like, I felt like it was, I was thinking about this or that. And she goes, it was 8-year-old Kayla that was responding in that moment. And I was like, oh, yeah, it was. It was 8-year-old Kayla who didn't get her needs met, responding in that moment because that's who was hurt. That's who was hurting. It was like, oh, you felt rejected again. Oh, I see. You went back to that younger self and you responded out of how an 8-year-old might respond. And I was like, ooh, I did kind of have a little bit of a tantrum there, didn't I? You know?
Well, I think too, when you talk about, you respond out of that place where it really gets you. I mean, like, and you just respond. What was it? Use the word with vomit. I can't think of what it was. Like we were talking about that.
Vomiting.
Live vomiting. Well, I'll get there and I'll, be upset by really something by what the kids are doing or whatever. Yeah. And I words are coming out and internally I'm going, stop talking. Just stop talking. Like nothing good is going to happen. And it just keeps coming out. Yeah. And like, sometimes I'll like pinch my arm a little bit, like, stop it. And I'll just be like, I have to walk away. And, but you get so worked up in that place. And, that just keeps happening in some situations. I'm like, why is that bothering me so much? Because really, it's not a big deal when I can step back and regulate it.
When you're not emotional.
And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Or sometimes it's like, either I will respond in a way and my husband's looking at me like, it's not really that big a deal. Like, why are we making this a big deal? And that's when I go, I am a big deal. Or like, why is that a problem? Or sometimes he gets really frustrated about something and I'm like, it's just like a kid thing, and that's when I know like, okay, this has got to be something about one of the two of us and not like if we're both really equally frustrated about it, it might be a frustrating situation, but a lot of times it really is something deeper and something, and that's been, that's just been transformative for me is just going, okay, I want to be curious about my own behaviors. Like I spend a whole lot of time being curious about my kids' behaviors and why are they doing that? And why do they respond that way? But I can really only control me. And so if I only can do one thing, it would be for me to respond differently. And that's going to at least not add fuel to the fire, right? Yeah. My kids may not respond completely differently, but if I can just keep my responses kind and relationship focused, instead of punitive or over the top, like I've got to make sure they understand this right this very second or just unkind,
Right.
If I can just keep my responses where I want them to be, then at least that's half the battle.
Right. So I would totally echo all of that. I would say that number one thing you really want to start working and getting to be a better parent is starting to understand how you were parented, how the things in past have affected. Thank you so much.
Because one of the things they say about trauma is that it's personal.
Yeah.
So even if you haven't experienced a big T, broken home, neglectful, abusive situation at home, the things you have experienced have shaped who you are.
Right.
And those experiences are personal. So nobody can tell you that what you experienced growing up is not real or didn't affect you or doesn't still affect you now.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times people think like, well, I wasn't abused or I wasn't in foster care or whatever. And they discount how experiences shape you, you know? And we all have stuff. It's like, what is it? My husband says, he's like, you may not have trauma, but you probably have some drama.
There you go.
And I'm like, yes, that's exactly right.
There
Everybody's got a little drama in their family. Everybody's got an adversity that they've come across, and it shapes who we are, and it shapes how we respond to things. And sometimes it shapes us for the better. Yeah. Because we deal with it and we move forward, and now we're able to, be kinder because we are more compassionate to people who go through those same experiences. Yeah. But sometimes if we don't deal with it, it makes us not respond in the way we want to.
Yeah, no, we're so glad to have you on, Kayla.
Yeah. Well, I figured you guys have come on our podcast enough times.
That's been fun too. Fun.
It's fun to be on.
Where can we hear more about what you guys are doing?
Yeah. So if you go to onebighappyhome.com, you can find out all the stuff, coaching and classes and everything that we do. Or you can listen to us on the Empowered Parent Podcast.
Highly recommend their podcast.
All right. Well, we'll link to One Big Happy Home and the Empowered Parent Podcast in the show notes if you want a quick place to find those. And we thank you for tuning in today and listening. We appreciate you. We have one more listener review we wanted to share with you. This one is from Corgi Mom 22. It says, this podcast is practical and relevant. They share their parenting struggles and successes in a practical way that you can apply. I listen with my kids so that we can talk about it and learn together. Well, thank you, Corgi Mom 22. Those are kind words. And if you want to hear your review read on the podcast here, head on over to Apple Podcasts and write a nice little review, and we'd be happy to share it with the other listeners here. Thank you for tuning in to our special question and answer episode. You can always send us other questions on social medias. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And we appreciate you listening. If you've gotten value from this podcast or you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends. Let them know. And we will be taking a few weeks off for in between season breaks here, but we will come back with season 3 of the Connected Parenting Minute before you know it. So stay subscribed and tell your friends. And before we go, we want to remind you,
you don't have to be a perfect parent,
but we can all get a little bit better, one Connected Parenting Minute at a time.
Thank you so much for listening to my mom and dad's podcast. I hope you feel really inspired today, and remember to subscribe for the next episode.
For more parenting tips or to connect with us, check out the Connected Parenting Minute on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Or you can send us an email using connectedparentingminute@gmail.com.